I thought the champagne flute slipping from my fingers was the worst thing that could happen at my own engagement party. The crystal shattered against the marble floor of the country club, drawing every eye in the room to me as I stood frozen in my emerald dress, staring at my phone screen. But that was before I read the message that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. Check your email, now. The photos explain everything. Friend. What I found in that email wasn't just proof that my fiancé was cheating, it was evidence of a conspiracy so elaborate, so carefully orchestrated, that it would take me months to understand I'd been a pawn in someone else's game from the very beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The caretaker job I thought saved my life, the devastating betrayal that led me there. Even the person I thought I could trust most, all of it was planned, all of it was designed to break me down, build me back up, and use me for something I never saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the moment my world collapsed, because that's where their plan truly began. The Riverside Country Club's grand ballroom was exactly what you'd expect for an engagement party thrown by the Ames family. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, while waiters in crisp uniforms glided between guests carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh orchids, and everyone who mattered in our small Connecticut town was there to celebrate my upcoming marriage to Tanner Ames. I should have been the happiest woman in the room. After 2 years of dating the town's most eligible bachelor, the son of Judge Patricia Ames and real estate mogul Richard Ames, I was finally getting my fairy tale ending, or so I thought. I was standing near the chocolate fountain, laughing at something my maid of honor Jennifer Bailey had whispered about my future mother-in-law's dress choice, when my phone buzzed with the anonymous message. The sender was listed only as unknown, but something about the urgency in those few words made my stomach clench with dread. "Thea, you look pale," Jennifer said, touching my arm with concern. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. My fingers were already trembling as I opened my email app, scrolling past the usual promotional messages and work correspondence to find the one that had just arrived. The subject line was simple: what you need to know about Tanner. The email contained no text, just 3 photo attachments. The first photo made my breath catch. It was Tanner, unmistakably Tanner, in what looked like a hotel room. He was shirtless, laughing at something off camera, his hair messed in that way it got when he'd been running his hands through it. The timestamp showed it was taken just 2 weeks ago, when he'd told me he was visiting his college roommate in Boston. The second photo showed him kissing someone. A woman with long blonde hair, and a figure that belonged in magazines. They were pressed against a wall, his hands tangled in her hair, their bodies molded together with the kind of desperation that spoke of long-denied desire, not a casual fling. But it was the third photo that made the champagne flute slip from my numb fingers. The woman's face was clearly visible now, turned toward the camera in what looked like a candid moment as she emerged from a bathroom, wearing nothing but Tanner's dress shirt. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely unfamiliar to me. But more than that, she was wearing a diamond necklace I recognized because I'd admired it just an hour earlier across the room. Clarissa Ames, Tanner's cousin, the successful Manhattan lawyer who'd flown in specially for our engagement party, the woman who'd hugged me warmly when she arrived, telling me how excited she was to welcome me to the family. The sound of crystal shattering against marble seemed to echo in slow motion. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Jennifer gasped and immediately knelt to help clean up the glass, but I couldn't move. I stood there in my carefully chosen dress, surrounded by everyone I'd ever known, staring at proof that my entire relationship was built on lies. Tanner's voice cut through the sudden quiet as he hurried over from across the room. "Sweetheart, what happened? Are you hurt?" He reached for me with those same hands I'd seen tangled in his cousin's hair just days ago, and I instinctively stepped back. The movement sent a shard of crystal skittering across the floor, and the sound seemed to snap everyone back to their conversations, though I could feel curious eyes still watching us. I started then stopped. What was I supposed to say? that I'd just discovered my fiancé was sleeping with his cousin, that our engagement party was apparently just an elaborate performance, that every kiss, every I love you, every plan we'd made together was apparently meaningless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Clarissa's voice came from behind me, smooth and concerned. I turned to see her approaching with 2 fresh glasses of champagne, her expression perfectly composed. The diamond necklace caught the light as she moved, and I had to fight the urge to be sick. "Here, take this." Sometimes the excitement of these events can be overwhelming. She was good, I had to give her that. Standing there in her midnight blue dress, offering me champagne with the same hand that had been photographed caressing her cousin's chest, expressing concern with the same lips that had been pressed against his just days ago. If I hadn't seen the photos, I would have believed every word. "Thank you," I managed, accepting the glass with steady hands even though everything inside me was screaming. "I think I just need some air." "Of course," Tanner said, immediately taking my elbow in a gesture that felt more possessive than protective. "Let's step outside for a moment." But as he guided me toward the terrace doors, I caught something in his expression. A flicker of concern that had nothing to do with my well-being, and everything to do with damage control. He was worried about what I might say, what I might do, how my behavior might affect his carefully constructed image. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about timing. My phone buzzing at this exact moment, at our engagement party, in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. Someone had wanted me to find out this way. Someone had wanted maximum impact, maximum humiliation, maximum destruction. But who? And why? As we stepped onto the moonlit terrace, leaving behind the warmth and laughter of the party that was supposed to celebrate our future, I realized I was about to find out just how deep this betrayal went. Because Tanner's next words would confirm that nothing about my life was what I'd thought it was. And somewhere in that crowded ballroom, someone was watching, waiting to see if their carefully laid plan was working exactly as intended. The cool October air on the terrace did nothing to calm the fire burning in my chest. Tanner closed the French doors behind us, muffling the sounds of the party, and for a moment we stood in silence among the carefully manicured topiaries and flickering lanterns. He was nervous. I could see it in the way he kept adjusting his tie, the same nervous habit he'd had since college. "Thea, sweetheart, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I held up my phone, the screen still showing Clarissa's face in that hotel bathroom. "When were you going to tell me?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. He stared at the image for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. When he finally looked up at me, there was no denial in his eyes, just resignation. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About 30 seconds longer than you've been lying to my face." My voice was steadier than I felt. "How long has it been going on?" Tanner ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the careful work his stylist had done earlier. "Thea, it's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated." I laughed, a harsh sound that made him flinch. "You're sleeping with your cousin, Tanner. That's not complicated, that's disgusting." "She's my step-cousin," he said quickly, as if that made it better. "And we have history, from before I met you. It just happened again." "When?" "Thea, when, Tanner?" He looked away, focusing on something beyond the terrace railings. 6 months ago, when she came back from London for Uncle Robert's funeral. 6 months. I thought about our romantic weekend in Vermont, 3 weeks later, when he'd seemed so distant. The sudden business trips, the phone calls he'd take in another room, the way he'd stop talking about our wedding plans with the same enthusiasm. "And you've been planning to tell me when exactly? After the wedding? On our honeymoon?" "I was going to end it," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I swear, Thea, this engagement party was supposed to help me remember what I really wanted." "And what do you really want, Tanner?" The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," he whispered. "I thought I knew, but being with Clarissa again, she understands me in ways that you never could. She comes from our world, she knows what it's like to have expectations, responsibilities." "Stop." I held up my hand, not wanting to hear another word. "Just stop." I started pulling off my engagement ring, the 3-carat diamond that had belonged to his grandmother, the one Judge Ames had presented to me with tears in her eyes just 6 months ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get it over my knuckle. Thea, wait, we can work through this. Clarissa doesn't have to mean anything. You're right, I said, finally freeing the ring and holding it out to him. She doesn't have to mean anything. Because neither do you. He stared at the ring in my palm but didn't take it. Behind us, the terrace doors opened and Jennifer appeared, her face tight with worry. Thea, your mom is looking for O. She took in the scene, my outstretched hand with the ring, Tanner's guilty expression, the tension crackling between. Should I tell her you'll be right in? Actually, I said, pressing the ring into Tanner's hand, tell her I'm leaving. Tell everyone I'm leaving. Thea, you can't just walk out of your own engagement party, Tanner said desperately. What will people think? I honestly don't care what people think, Tanner. That's the difference between us. I started toward the doors but he caught my arm. Please, can we at least talk about this privately? Tomorrow, when you've had time to process. There's nothing to process. I shook off his grip. You made your choice 6 months ago. Now I'm making mine. Jennifer stepped aside as I walked past her into the ballroom. The party was in full swing, but I could feel the weight of curious stares as I made my way toward the exit. Some people had definitely noticed our absence, and were now watching for signs of drama. Judge Ames intercepted me near the coat check. Thea, dear, is everything all right? You look upset. I looked into her kind, concerned face, and felt a stab of genuine sadness. She had been nothing but welcoming to me, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. Learning that her son was carrying on with his step-cousin was going to devastate her. I'm fine, Mrs. Ames, just feeling a bit overwhelmed. I think I need to head home early. Of course, dear. These events can be exhausting. She squeezed my hand warmly. I'm so looking forward to having you as part of our family. The irony was almost unbearable. Thank you, I managed. You've been wonderful to me. I collected my coat and purse, ignoring the questioning looks from other guests. My parents were deep in conversation with some of their golf club friends, and I couldn't face explaining everything to them here. I'd call them tomorrow, when I'd figured out what I was going to say. The valet brought my car around, and as I slipped him a tip, I caught sight of Clarissa through the ballroom windows. She was standing exactly where I'd left her, wineglass in hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For just a moment, our eyes met through the glass, and she smiled. Not a sympathetic smile, or an embarrassed one. It was satisfied, almost triumphant, like she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. As I drove away from the country club, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Jennifer, my mom, my sister, even some of the guests who'd figured out something was wrong. But I turned the phone face down and focused on driving. It wasn't until I pulled into my apartment complex that the full weight of what had just happened hit me. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring up at the windows of the home I'd shared with Tanner for the past year, and realized I had nowhere else to go. My lease had expired 3 months ago. We'd moved in together, started splitting everything. My savings account, once healthy, had been depleted by wedding expenses, and the assumption that we'd be combining our finances permanently. I'd even given notice at my job at the physical therapy clinic, planning to move to Hartford after the wedding, where Tanner's law firm had a satellite office. I had no job, no lease, no savings, and now no fiancé. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice wondered why someone had sent me those photos tonight, at that exact moment, in that exact way. Someone had wanted to destroy me completely. The question was, who, and what did they want me to do next? I spent the night on my own couch like a stranger in my own home. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every shared memory felt contaminated by Tanner's betrayal. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed, couldn't even look at the wedding dress hanging in the closet, or the pile of gift boxes stacked in the corner, still wrapped in their elegant paper and ribbons. By 6 a.m., I'd made 17 lists. Lists of what I needed to do, people I needed to call, decisions I needed to make. But every list started the same way. Find somewhere to live, because despite my name being on the lease renewal, Tanner had insisted we sign together. I knew I couldn't stay here. Not with his clothes still in the closet, and his coffee mug still in the sink from yesterday morning, back when I thought I knew who he was. My phone had been buzzing all night with messages and missed calls. I'd finally turned it off around 3 a.m., unable to face another concerned text from family or friends who'd witnessed the train wreck at the country club. But avoiding the world forever wasn't an option. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my third cup of coffee, staring at apartment listings I couldn't afford, when someone knocked on the door. 3 soft raps, then a pause, then 3 more. I knew that knock. "Thea, honey, it's Mrs. Morrison. I saw your car in the lot all night." Mrs. Dorothy Morrison had lived in the apartment next door for 12 years. She was in her 70s, had bright silver hair that she wore in perfect curls, and possessed an uncanny ability to sense when someone needed help. She'd been the first person to welcome me when I'd moved in 2 years ago, showing up with homemade cookies and an invitation to call her Dorothy, because Mrs. Morrison makes me feel ancient. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, with a tray containing 2 cups of tea, and what looked like fresh blueberry muffins. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, taking one look at my face, "you look like you haven't slept at all." "I haven't." My voice came out as a croak. "Well, that settles it then. Move aside and let me in. We're having breakfast, and you're going to tell me what's wrong." I wanted to protest, to say I was fine, to maintain the facade that everything was under control. But something about Dorothy's matter-of-fact kindness broke through my defenses. I stepped aside and let her take over my kitchen, watching as she set out the tea and muffins with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been taking care of people her whole life. "Now then," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the photos, about Tanner and Clarissa, about walking out of my own engagement party. I told her about the apartment lease and the job I'd quit, and the savings account I'd emptied for a wedding that was never going to happen. By the time I finished, I was crying again, and Dorothy had moved her chair around the table to sit beside me, one weathered hand rubbing gentle circles on my back. "That boy is a fool," she said finally. "But you already know that." I laughed to spite my tears. "Everyone's going to think I'm the fool, the girl who got dumped at her own engagement party." "Oh honey, no." Dorothy's voice was fierce. "You're the girl who was strong enough to walk away when she discovered the truth. That takes courage." "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like my life is falling apart." Dorothy was quiet for a moment, sipping her tea thoughtfully. "Can I tell you something about falling apart?" I nodded. 43 years ago, I was married to a man named Harold Morrison. Good-looking, charming, came from a nice family. We had a beautiful wedding, a lovely house, and what I thought was a perfect marriage. She paused, staring into her teacup. "Then I came home early from my book club one day, and found him in our bed with my sister." My head snapped up. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry." "Oh, don't be sorry for me, dear. Be proud of me. Because you know what I did. I packed a suitcase, took half the money from our joint account, and drove to California without telling a soul where I was going." "What happened?" "I lived." Her smile was radiant. "I got a job as a secretary at a movie studio, rented a tiny apartment in Santa Monica, and learned how to surf at age 32. I fell in love with a screenwriter named James, who made me laugh until my sides hurt. We had 38 wonderful years together before cancer took him." I stared at her, trying to reconcile this adventurous woman with the quiet neighbor I thought I knew. "The point is," Dorothy continued, "sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that happens to you. It just takes time to see it that way." "But what am I supposed to do now? I have nowhere to live, no job, no plan." Dorothy reached across the table and pulled a newspaper from her purse. "Funny you should ask. I was reading the classifieds this morning, and something caught my eye." She flipped to a page she'd folded down and pointed to a small ad circled in red ink. "Live-in caregiver needed for elderly gentleman. Private estate. Room and board provided plus generous salary. Experience preferred but not required for the right candidate. Immediate start available." I read the ad twice. "Dorothy, I'm not a caregiver. I'm a physical therapist assistant, but that's completely different." "Is it? You help people recover from injuries, don't you?" You understand medical needs, mobility issues, therapeutic exercises. Well, yes, and you need a job and a place to live immediately. Yes, but this seems too good to be true. Live-in positions like this, they're usually for people with years of experience, or family members, or people who are desperate enough to take a chance, Dorothy said gently. Sometimes opportunities come to us exactly when we need them most. I looked at the ad again. There was a phone number, but no name, no address, no details about the patient or the nature of his condition. What if it's some kind of scam? Then you hang up the phone and move on to the next option. But what if it's not? What if it's exactly what you need to get back on your feet? I thought about my empty bank account, my non-existent lease, the pile of wedding gifts I'd have to return. I thought about facing my parents and explaining why their daughter was moving back home at 28. I thought about running into Tanner and Clarissa around town, seeing the pitying looks from people who knew our business. I wouldn't even know what to say, I admitted. Dorothy smiled and pulled out her phone. How about we start with hello? Before I could protest, she was dialing the number from the ad. My heart hammered as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Amelia Reynolds speaking. The voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of warmth. Dorothy nudged the phone toward me. I took a deep breath and found my voice. Hello, Miss Reynolds. I'm calling about the caregiver position. My name is Thea Hoffman, and I'm very interested in learning more. Excellent timing, Miss Hoffman. Are you available for an interview this afternoon? I looked at Dorothy, who was nodding encouragingly. Yes, I am. Perfect. I'll text you the address. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? Absolutely. Wonderful. I look forward to meeting you. The line went dead, and immediately my phone buzzed with a text containing an address I didn't recognize. Dorothy was beaming at me like I'd just won the lottery. See, sometimes all it takes is one phone call to change your life. As I stared at the address on my phone, something about this felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. But then again, maybe Dorothy was right. Maybe sometimes the universe conspired to help you exactly when you needed it most. I had no way of knowing that the universe had nothing to do with it. The drive to the interview took me through parts of Connecticut I'd never seen before. As my GPS guided me deeper into horse country, past stone walls and sprawling estates hidden behind ancient oak trees, I felt like I was entering a different world entirely. The modest suburb where I'd grown up seemed like a distant memory, and my life with Tanner, which had felt so sophisticated just 24 hours ago, now seemed quaint by comparison. I'd spent the morning preparing for this interview like it was the most important moment of my life, because in many ways it was. I'd researched everything I could about private caregiving, reviewed my physical therapy coursework, and practiced answers to questions I imagined Amelia Reynolds might ask. But underneath all that preparation was a growing sense of unreality, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. The address led me to a pair of imposing iron gates set into a stone wall that seemed to stretch for miles in both directions. There was no visible house, just a perfectly manicured driveway that curved away into a tunnel of maple trees. I pressed the call button on the intercom system, and after a moment, the same crisp voice I'd heard on the phone crackled through the speaker. Miss Hoffman? Yes, it's Thea. Perfect timing. Please drive up to the main house. The gates swung open with a mechanical hum that seemed to whisper welcome to your new life. As I drove up the winding drive, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back to Dorothy's tea and sensible advice, and the comfortable certainty of failure. At least failure was predictable. The house that emerged from the trees was not what I'd expected. Instead of some Gothic mansion or cold modernist cube, it was a sprawling Tudor-style estate that managed to look both imposing and welcoming. Ivy climbed the stone walls, and mullioned windows reflected the late afternoon sun like friendly eyes. It looked like the kind of place where families gathered for holidays, where children ran through halls filled with laughter and history. I parked in the circular drive, and sat for a moment, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blazer over a white blouse, professional but not stuffy. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and I'd covered the dark circles under my eyes with concealer. I looked competent, reliable, exactly like someone you'd trust to care for a vulnerable family member. The problem was, I didn't feel like that person at all. As I walked to the front door, I caught myself rehearsing my cover story one more time. I was between jobs, looking for a change of pace, excited about the opportunity to provide one-on-one care in a home setting. All technically true, but carefully edited to remove any hint of the chaos my life had become. No mention of Tanner, of the engagement party disaster, of the fact that I'd been completely blindsided by my own life. The door opened before I could knock. Amelia Reynolds was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an elegant chignon, and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a camel-colored cashmere sweater and dark wool slacks, radiating the kind of effortless sophistication that came from old money and good breeding. "Thea, how lovely to meet you in person. Please, come in." She led me through a marble-floored foyer dominated by a crystal chandelier and a curving staircase that belonged in a movie. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of handsome, serious-faced people who looked like they'd never had a moment of uncertainty in their lives. "Beautiful home," I said, meaning it. "Thank you. It's been in my brother's family for 3 generations. We're quite attached to it." She gestured toward a sitting room furnished with antique furniture and oriental rugs. "Shall we sit? I've had Mrs. Chen prepare some tea." As if summoned, a small Asian woman appeared with a silver tea service, setting it on the coffee table between us with practiced efficiency. The china was delicate, probably worth more than my car, and I found myself being extra careful as Amelia poured. "So, Thea, tell me about your background." I launched into my carefully prepared summary. My degree in exercise science, my certification as a physical therapy assistant, my experience working with patients recovering from various injuries and surgeries. I managed to make my modest resume sound impressive, highlighting my patience, my attention to detail, my ability to motivate people through difficult periods of recovery. "That sounds perfect," Amelia said, when I finished. "Can I ask what made you interested in private care rather than continuing in a clinical setting?" This was the question I'd been dreading. I'd practiced the answer a dozen times, but sitting here in this elegant room, surrounded by the stability and certainty I'd always craved, the lie felt heavier than usual. "I've always been drawn to the idea of providing more personalized care," I said. "In a clinical setting, you're limited by time constraints and institutional policies. I like the idea of being able to focus completely on one person's needs and really make a difference in their recovery." It wasn't entirely false. I had always preferred working one-on-one with patients, building relationships over time, rather than rushing through scheduled appointments. But the real reason I was here, because my life had imploded and I was desperate, hung unspoken between us. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. "And you're available to start immediately?" "This is a live-in position, as I mentioned. You'd have your own suite, of course, but you'd be on call around the clock. Some people find that level of commitment challenging." "I'm definitely available," I said, perhaps a bit too quickly. I actually prefer the idea of being fully involved in someone's care, rather than just dropping in for scheduled sessions. "Wonderful." Amelia's smile seemed genuine, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Now let me tell you about Lucas." Lucas, so the patient had a name. For some reason, that made everything feel more real. "My brother is 35 years old," Amelia continued. 6 months ago he was in a serious car accident that left him with significant mobility challenges. He's made remarkable progress, but he still requires assistance with daily activities, and he's been resistant to outside help." "Resistant how?" "He's sent away 3 caregivers in the past 4 months. Lucas has always been very independent, very private. The accident changed that, and he's struggling to accept help from strangers. He can be difficult, demanding, sometimes quite rude. I want to be honest about that. I thought about my years working with patients in various stages of pain and frustration. I'd dealt with angry teenagers who took their limitations out on anyone within reach, elderly patients who resented their bodies' betrayals, adults whose injuries had stolen their sense of identity. Difficult was relative. "I understand," I said. "Physical limitations can be emotionally devastating. Anger is often just fear wearing a different mask. Amelia's eyes lit up. Exactly. I think you might be just what Lucas needs, someone who understands that his behavior isn't personal. We talked for another 20 minutes about practical details, salary more than generous, schedule, flexible but comprehensive, living arrangements, a private suite on the second floor. Everything sounded almost too good to be true, which should have been my first warning. When would you like me to start? I asked. Would tomorrow be too soon? I know it's sudden, but Lucas is between caregivers, and frankly I think the sooner we can establish a routine, the better. Tomorrow, less than 24 hours from now, I could be living in this beautiful house, focusing on helping someone else, instead of drowning in my own problems. It felt like salvation. Tomorrow would be perfect, I said. As Amelia walked me to the door, I caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upstairs windows, a figure in a wheelchair, watching. Lucas, presumably. Even from a distance there was something intense about his gaze, something that made me feel observed and evaluated. When I looked up again, the window was empty. He's curious about you, Amelia said, following my gaze. That's a good sign. Usually he ignores new people entirely. As I drove back down the tree-lined drive, I felt lighter than I had in days. I had a job, a place to live, a purpose. For the first time since the engagement party disaster, I felt like I might actually be okay. I had no idea that curiosity could be dangerous, or that sometimes the most perfect opportunities came with the highest prices attached. That evening, I called my parents to tell them about the job opportunity. I'd been dreading this conversation all day, knowing they'd have questions I wasn't ready to answer about Tanner and the engagement party. But I needed their blessing, or at least their understanding, before I disappeared into someone else's life. A live-in caregiver position. My mother's voice carried that particular tone she used when she was trying not to sound worried. Thea, honey, that's quite a departure from what you've been doing. It's still healthcare, Mom, just more personalized, but you barely know these people. What if they're strange? What if you're not safe? I understood her concern. 24 hours ago, I'd been planning a wedding to a man from one of the most respected families in our area. Now I was moving in with complete strangers. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd lost my mind. Amelia Reynolds seems very professional, I said, which was true. And the salary is excellent. This could be a great opportunity to save money and gain experience in private care. What I didn't tell them was that I had no choice, that my savings account had exactly $347 left in it, that the apartment lease I'd signed with Tanner was legally binding, and I couldn't afford my half of the rent without a job, that I'd rather live with strangers than move back to my childhood bedroom and face the daily questions about my broken engagement. What about Tanner? My father asked, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. I thought you two were house hunting. Judge Ames mentioned something about looking at that colonial on Maple Street. I closed my eyes, remembering how excited I'd been about that house just a week ago. The built-in bookshelves in the living room, the big kitchen where I'd imagined hosting dinner parties, the master bedroom with windows that faced east toward the sunrise. I'd already been mentally decorating the nursery. Tanner and I are taking a break, I said carefully. We realized we might be rushing into things. It was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than admitting that our entire relationship had been built on lies, that he'd been sleeping with his cousin for months while I planned our future. My parents liked Tanner, respected his family, had been so proud when we got engaged. Destroying that image felt cruel, especially when I wasn't ready to deal with their sympathy or their questions. A break? My mother's voice sharpened. Sweetheart, what happened? You seemed so happy at dinner last week. Sometimes things just change, Mom. We're both figuring out what we want. But the wedding invitations are being postponed, I said firmly. Look, I really need to pack. I'm starting tomorrow morning, and I want to make a good impression. After I hung up, I sat on my bed surrounded by clothes I couldn't decide how to pack. What did you wear to live with strangers? How many books was too many? Should I bring the framed photo of my college graduation, or would that make me seem homesick and unprofessional? My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Called you 3 times. What happened after you left last night? Tanner's not answering either. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Something came up. I'll call you in a few days. Another text immediately. Thea, you're scaring me. Just tell me you're okay. I'm okay. Promise. Just need some space to think. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was okay, or I would be once I got away from here. Away from the memories and the whispered conversations, and the pitying looks. The caregiver job was my escape hatch, my chance to disappear into someone else's problems for a while. As I folded my clothes into the 2 large suitcases I'd bought for our cancelled honeymoon, I tried to imagine what Lucas would be like. Amelia had said he was difficult, resistant to help, sometimes rude. In my experience, the angriest patients were usually the most frightened ones. People who'd lost control of their bodies often tried to control everything else instead: their schedule, their environment, the people around them. I could work with difficult. Difficult was honest, at least, better than charming lies and hidden affairs. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was a .reynolds@reynoldstate.com, and the subject line read, "Tomorrow's schedule and important information. Dear Thea," the email began. "I'm so pleased you'll be joining us tomorrow. I wanted to provide you with some important details about Lucas's condition and routine to help you prepare. Lucas suffered spinal injuries in his accident, as well as some traumatic brain injury that affects his short-term memory and emotional regulation. Some days are better than others. He's made remarkable physical progress, much more than his doctors initially predicted, but he can become frustrated when he pushes himself too hard. He prefers a structured routine but doesn't like feeling managed. He's most cooperative in the mornings, and tends to be more difficult in the evenings when he's tired. Please don't take anything he says personally. He's not himself yet, and we're all hoping the right caregiver can help him find his way back. I've attached his medication schedule and physical therapy routine. Please review these carefully. His previous caregivers struggled because they tried to impose their own methods rather than working with his personality. I have complete confidence that you'll be different. Looking forward to tomorrow. Best regards, Amelia." I downloaded the attachments and spent the next hour studying them. Lucas's routine was indeed structured: medications at precise times, physical therapy sessions mapped out in 15-minute increments, even his meals planned with nutritional requirements noted. It read like a military schedule designed to optimize recovery. What struck me was how isolated it all seemed. No mention of friends visiting, family dinners, social activities, just medical care and therapy, as if Lucas had become a project rather than a person. Maybe that was why the other caregivers had failed. Maybe they'd treated him like a patient instead of a man who was trying to rebuild his life after losing everything he'd thought was permanent. I understood something about that. As I finished packing, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. 28 years old, about to move in with strangers, starting over from scratch. 6 months ago, I'd thought I had everything figured out. Now I was grasping at lifelines thrown by people I didn't know. But maybe that was exactly what I needed: a complete break from everything familiar, a chance to help someone else, while I figured out how to help myself. Tomorrow, I would meet Lucas and discover what kind of person I became when everything I'd known about myself was stripped away. I arrived at the estate the next morning, with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. It felt surreal, like I was moving into a movie set rather than starting a new life. The morning mist clung to the manicured grounds, and the Tudor mansion looked even more imposing in the gray October light. Amelia met me at the front door, dressed in a burgundy wool dress that probably cost more than I'd made in a month at the clinic. She looked fresh and composed, as if she'd been awake for hours preparing for my arrival. "Thea, perfect timing. Let me show you to your rooms first, then we'll go over Lucas's morning routine." She led me up the grand staircase to the 2nd floor, past oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors and antique furniture that belonged in museums. My suite was at the end of a long hallway lined with Persian runners, a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom that were larger and more elegant than any place I'd ever lived. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Amelia said, watching as I set down my bags. "Mrs. Chen handles all the laundry, and meals are served in the main dining room, unless Lucas prefers to eat in his room, which happens frequently. I walked to the tall windows that looked out over the estate's back gardens. Even in autumn, everything was perfectly maintained: geometric hedges, dormant flower beds marked with small copper plaques, a stone fountain that probably ran continuously in warmer months. It was beautiful, but sterile somehow, like a museum display of how wealthy people lived. "This is incredible," I said, meaning it. "Thank you." "You're very welcome. Now, shall we go meet Lucas? He's usually more receptive in the mornings, though I should warn you that yesterday was difficult for him. He had physical therapy, which he tolerates, but doesn't enjoy." As we walked back down the hallway, I caught sight of family photographs lining a console table. Amelia, at various ages, always perfectly dressed and smiling. A distinguished older couple who must have been their parents, and Lucas, before the accident, I assumed. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never doubted his place in the world. In one photo, he was skiing, poles planted confidently, as he posed mid-run. In another, he wore a business suit and stood beside what looked like a tech company logo. "He was in technology," Amelia said, noticing my interest. "Developed software for medical device companies. Very successful, very driven. The accident happened during a skiing trip to Vermont, his way of celebrating closing a major deal." I studied the photos more closely. This Lucas looked nothing like the patients I'd worked with at the clinic. Those people had been struggling with money, with insurance coverage, with the basic challenges of recovery. This Lucas had clearly never had to worry about anything, except which expensive hobby to pursue next. "How has he been handling the changes?" I asked. "Not well," Amelia admitted. "Lucas was used to controlling everything in his life. Now he can't control his own body, and it's making him reactive." The other caregivers took his anger personally. We stopped outside a heavy wooden door. Amelia knocked twice, then called out, "Lucas, I'd like you to meet Thea." "I'm busy," came the response from inside. The voice was deep-clipped, clearly annoyed. "Lucas," Amelia tried again, her tone patient but firm. "We discussed this yesterday." A long pause, then "Fine. Come in." Amelia opened the door to reveal a room that was part bedroom, part office, part gym. Medical equipment sat alongside expensive computer monitors and what looked like high-end audio equipment. And there, beside a wall of windows that faced the gardens, was Lucas. The photos hadn't prepared me for the reality of him. He was still handsome, but there was a hardness to his features now, a tension around his eyes that spoke of constant pain or frustration. His dark hair was longer than in the photos, and he wore sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung loosely on what had obviously once been a more muscular frame. The wheelchair he sat in was top of the line, more like a piece of sophisticated machinery than medical equipment. But it was his eyes that caught me off guard. They were intelligent, assessing, and completely unwelcoming. "So," he said, looking me up and down with obvious skepticism, "another optimistic caregiver ready to fix me." "I'm not here to fix you," I said, before Amelia could intervene. "I'm here to help you fix yourself, if that's what you want." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And if it's not what I want, then I'll help you be comfortable while you figure out what you do want." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling I was being tested. The last one tried to make me practice walking with a cane for 3 hours straight. Said I needed to push through the discomfort. How did that work out? She lasted 2 days. Sounds like she didn't understand the difference between therapeutic challenge and punishment. For the first time, something that might have been interest flickered in his expression. "And you do?" "I understand that recovery isn't a straight line, and that some days the biggest victory is just accepting help when you need it." Amelia was watching this exchange with what looked like cautious hope. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," she said. "Thea, Lucas's morning medications are on the table by his bed. He prefers to handle them himself, but please make sure he takes them." After she left, Lucas and I regarded each other in silence. The room felt heavy with unspoken challenges and expectations. "Why are you really here?" he asked. Finally. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean? You don't look like a career caregiver. Too young, too," he gestured vaguely. "Too put together. Most people who do this work either genuinely love helping people, or they can't do anything else. You don't seem like either." I could have lied, given him the same practice story I'd told Amelia about wanting to provide personalized care. But something about his directness made me want to be equally honest. "You're right," I said. "I'm here because my life fell apart 3 days ago, and this job was the only thing standing between me and complete disaster." He blinked, clearly not expecting that level of honesty. "What kind of disaster?" "The kind where you discover everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie, and you have to start over from nothing." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. "Well," he said finally, "that's refreshingly honest. I try to be. Good, because I hate being managed, and I hate being lied to even more. If you're going to last longer than the others, we're going to need to be straight with each other. I can work with that. We'll see." But his tone had lost some of its edge. "The medications are over there. I can handle them myself, but Amelia worries if someone isn't watching." As I moved to organize his morning pills, I caught him studying me with curious intensity. "What happened?" he asked. "To your life, I mean." I looked up from the pill organizer. "Maybe I'll tell you. When I know you better." For the first time since I'd walked into the room, Lucas almost smiled. The first week at the Reynolds estate passed in a blur of routines and careful boundary setting. I quickly learned that the house operated like a well-oiled machine, with Mrs. Chen managing the domestic staff, a groundskeeper named Evan, who maintained the extensive gardens, and a physical therapist named Dr. Martina, who came 3 times a week for Lucas's sessions. Everyone was polite but distant, treating me with the same professional courtesy they'd probably extended to my 3 predecessors. I was temporary help, after all. Another caregiver, who would either quit or be fired within a month. The wealth surrounding me was unlike anything I'd experienced. Fresh flowers appeared in every room daily, replaced before they could even think of wilting. The kitchen was stocked with organic everything, specialty items I'd only seen in gourmet magazines. My bathroom had heated marble floors and towels so soft they felt like clouds. It was luxury that felt almost aggressive in its perfection. But it was the isolation that struck me most. Despite the beautiful grounds and elegant rooms, the house felt like a fortress designed to keep the world out rather than invite it in. No one came to visit. The phone rarely rang. Even the mail was handled by staff and sorted before anyone in the family saw it. Lucas, I discovered, was both more complex and more challenging than I'd expected. His intelligence was razor sharp, but his moods shifted like weather patterns I couldn't predict. Some mornings he was almost friendly, asking about my background or making dry observations about the news. Other days he barely acknowledged my presence, responding to questions with grunts or dismissive gestures. "He's testing you," Dr. Martinez explained after a particularly difficult therapy session, where Lucas had refused to complete his exercises. He did the same thing with the others. "Pushes boundaries until you either push back or give up." What happened with the ones who pushed back? They usually ended up in shouting matches with him. Amelia doesn't tolerate staff who can't maintain professional composure. I was learning that Amelia Reynolds was the real authority in this house. She appeared at regular intervals throughout the day, checking on Lucas's progress, reviewing his medication schedule, asking pointed questions about his mood and cooperation level. She was never unkind, but there was something calculating about her attention, as if she were constantly evaluating whether I was meeting some unspoken standard. "How is he sleeping?" she asked one afternoon as we stood in the hall outside Lucas's room. He was napping after a grueling physical therapy session, and I could hear the soft sound of his breathing through the partially open door. "Better than when I started," I said truthfully. "He was having nightmares the first few nights, but they seem to be lessening. Nightmares about the accident. He doesn't talk about them, but he mentions something about driving, about not being able to stop in time. Amelia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The doctors said memory issues were common with his type of injury. Sometimes it's better not to remember everything. There was something odd about the way she said it. But before I could ask what she meant, Lucas's voice called from his room. "Thea, could you come here for a minute?" I found him sitting by the window, looking out at the gardens where Ivan was pruning the last of the autumn roses. Lucas had been doing this a lot lately, staring outside with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched?" he asked without looking at me. The question sent a small chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific. Just, this house has a lot of security cameras. Motion sensors. Amelia says it's because of the valuable artwork and antiques, but sometimes I wonder if she's keeping track of more than potential burglars." I glanced around his room, suddenly noticing things I'd overlooked before. There was indeed a small camera mounted discreetly in the upper corner, partially hidden by crown molding. I'd assumed it was for Lucas's safety. Many patients with mobility issues had monitoring systems in case of falls or medical emergencies. "She's worried about you," I said carefully. "That's what sisters do." "Half-sister," Lucas corrected, "and she wasn't always this attentive. Before the accident, we barely spoke. Different mothers, different lives. Now suddenly she's moved in here, managing every detail of my recovery. Maybe the accident made her realize how much family means to her." Lucas turned to look at me, and I was struck again by how intense his gaze could be. Or maybe it gave her a reason to finally take control of something she'd always wanted. Before I could ask what he meant by that, Amelia's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Thea, could you join me in the study when you have a moment?" Lucas smiled, but it wasn't particularly pleasant. "Speak of the devil. She wants to debrief about my behavior, probably. Make sure I'm not corrupting you with my suspicious nature." The study was on the first floor, lined with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened and furnished with antiques that belonged in a museum. Amelia sat behind a massive mahogany desk, looking every inch the estate manager she claimed to be. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "I wanted to check in about how you're settling in." "Everything's been wonderful," I said honestly. "The accommodations are more generous than I expected, and I'm grateful for the opportunity." "And Lucas, how are you finding him to work with?" I chose my words carefully. "He's intelligent and perceptive, challenging sometimes, but not unreasonably so. I think he's frustrated by his limitations, which is completely understandable." "Has he talked about the accident at all?" "Only in passing. I haven't pressed him about it." "Good. The doctors feel it's better for him not to dwell on traumatic memories while he's still recovering. Sometimes patients become fixated on details that don't matter, conspiracy theories about what happened. It's a form of denial, really." Her tone was casual, but something about the way she emphasized conspiracy theories made me pay attention. "Has that been a problem with Lucas?" "Oh, not really. Just occasional comments about the car's brakes, questions about the accident investigation. Nothing serious, but the neurologist said these kinds of obsessive thoughts can interfere with healing." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp brown eyes. "I hope you'll let me know if he brings up anything concerning. As his medical proxy, I need to be aware of any changes in his mental state." "Of course," I said, though something about the conversation felt off. "Is there anything specific I should watch for?" "Just the usual things. Paranoid thoughts, anger directed at family members, resistance to medication. Brain injuries can cause personality changes that are difficult for everyone involved." As I walked back upstairs, I found myself thinking about Lucas's questions about being watched. His comments about Amelia's sudden involvement in his life. Were these the obsessive thoughts she was worried about, or was there something else going on that I wasn't seeing? That night, as I prepared for bed in my luxurious suite, I caught myself checking the corners of my room for cameras. I didn't find any, but the feeling of being observed lingered. For the first time since arriving at the estate, I wondered if I'd jumped from one dangerous situation into another. By the end of my second week at the estate, Lucas and I had settled into something that wasn't quite friendship but wasn't purely professional either. He'd stopped testing me with impossible demands or deliberate rudeness, and I'd learned to read his moods well enough to know when to push and when to give him space. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning when I found him in his room, staring at a laptop screen with an expression of pure frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down his morning coffee. "My business partner sent quarterly reports," he said without looking up. "I used to be able to analyze these numbers in my sleep. Now I can barely get through 2 pages without my head feeling like it's going to explode." I moved closer to see what he was looking at. The screen showed spreadsheets full of financial data, graphs tracking revenue and expenses, projections that meant nothing to me, but clearly represented something important to him. "How long have you been working on this?" I asked. 3 hours. I used to do this in 30 minutes. The defeat in his voice was palpable. This wasn't just about physical limitations, this was about losing a fundamental part of who he'd been. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. "Want some help?" I offered. "I'm not a business analyst, but sometimes a fresh set of eyes can see patterns that aren't obvious when you're too close to something." He looked up at me skeptically. "You know about financial projections?" "No, but I know about problem solving. And sometimes talking through a problem out loud helps clarify what you're actually looking for." For a moment I thought he'd dismiss the offer. Then he sighed and gestured to the chair beside his desk. "Why not? Can't make it worse." We spent the next hour going through the reports page by page. I asked basic questions: what this number meant, why that trend mattered, how different factors connected to each other. Lucas started out explaining things with the patience of someone talking to a child, but gradually his tone shifted as he began thinking out loud, using my questions as jumping-off points for his own analysis. "The issue isn't the revenue decline," he said suddenly, pointing at a graph. "It's the timing. Look, our biggest client renewals happen in Q1, but we're showing expense increases in Q4. That means Ethan is spending money we don't have yet, betting on deals that might not close. Is that normal for your business?" "It's aggressive. Ethan's always been more willing to take risks than I am, but this," he scrolled through more data, his frown deepening. "This is reckless. He's leveraging everything on assumptions about client behavior that might not hold true." I watched his face as he worked, saw the sharp intelligence that injury hadn't touched. This was who Lucas had been before the accident: confident, analytical, someone who could see patterns and possibilities that others missed. "You miss it," I said. It wasn't a question. "Every day." He leaned back in his wheelchair, suddenly looking exhausted. "People think losing the use of your legs is the worst part of this kind of injury, but losing your cognitive edge, your ability to think clearly, that's what really terrifies me. But you just proved your cognitive edge is still there. You saw patterns in that data that probably would have taken your partner much longer to identify. It took me 3 hours to get there. So, maybe speed isn't the most important thing, maybe thoroughness is better anyway." He studied me with that intense gaze I was getting used to. "Why are you really here, Thea? And don't tell me it's just because your life fell apart. Lots of people's lives fall apart. They don't all end up as caregivers." I'd been dreading this question, but also knowing it would come eventually. Lucas was too perceptive to accept surface explanations indefinitely. "You want the truth." "I always want the truth." I took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, I was supposed to get married. I found out at my own engagement party that my fiancé had been having an affair with his cousin for 6 months. I lost my relationship, my home, my job, and my entire social circle in one night. This position was literally the only option I had that didn't involve moving back in with my parents. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "That's brutal." It was. But you know what the worst part was? It wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing that I'd been so focused on creating this perfect life that I'd never bothered to notice it was all built on lies. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent 2 years planning a wedding to a man I didn't really know, in a relationship I'd convinced myself was everything I wanted because it looked right from the outside. I was so busy being the perfect fiancé that I forgot to pay attention to whether I was actually happy. Lucas nodded slowly. I know something about that. Before the accident, I was so focused on building my company, on hitting the next milestone, that I barely had time for anything else. I worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, measured everything by profit margins and market share. Do you miss that part of it? Sometimes. But honestly, the accident forced me to stop and actually think about what I want my life to look like. That's not entirely a bad thing. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the rain drumming against the windows. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. Your sister mentioned that you've been having some concerns about the accident, questions about what happened. His expression immediately shuddered. What kind of concerns? She didn't give specifics, just said that sometimes patients develop theories about their injuries that aren't necessarily based in reality. Lucas's laugh was bitter. Theories. That's one way to put it. What would you call it? He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust me with something important. Finally, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. How much do you know about car accidents? He asked. Not much. Why? Because I've been doing some research into mine, and the more I learn, the more convinced I become that it wasn't an accident at all. He opened the folder to reveal police reports, insurance documents, and what looked like photographs of a mangled vehicle. Someone tried to kill me, Thea, and I think they're still trying to finish the job. I stared at the police report in Lucas's hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. The official document was filled with technical language about road conditions and vehicle damage, but one line jumped out at me. Brake failure suspected but inconclusive due to extensive fire damage. Lucas, I said, carefully, this could mean anything. Brake systems fail all the time, especially in older cars. This wasn't an older car. It was a brand new Tesla Model S, top of the line, with every safety feature available. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. And look at this. He pulled out another document, an insurance investigator's report. They found traces of brake fluid on the road leading up to the accident site, not where you'd expect to find it if the line had simply worn through. What are you saying? I'm saying someone cut my brake lines, and I think I know who. Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. We both froze, and Lucas quickly shoved the papers back into the folder. Come in, he called, his voice carefully neutral. Amelia entered with her usual composed smile, carrying a tea tray. I thought you two might like some refreshment. How are the business reports coming along? Fine, Lucas said, closing his laptop. Thea's been helping me work through some of the more complex analyses. How wonderful. Amelia's eyes flickered to the folder on Lucas's desk, but her expression didn't change. I hope you're not overexerting yourself, Dr. Martinez said. Your last session was quite intensive. I'm fine, Amelia. Of course you are. But you know how concerned I get when you push too hard. She set down the tea tray and poured 2 cups with practiced grace. Thea, how are you finding the work? Not too overwhelming, I hope? There was something in her tone that made me think this wasn't a casual check-in. It's been enlightening, I said honestly. Lucas is very dedicated to his recovery. Sometimes too dedicated. Amelia handed me a cup, and our fingers brushed for a moment. Her skin was ice cold despite the warm room. I worry that he's becoming obsessed with certain projects that might not be healthy for his healing process. Lucas's hands tightened on his own teacup. I'm sitting right here, Amelia. If you have concerns about my mental state, you can address them directly to me. You're right, of course. Her smile never wavered. I just think that sometimes external perspectives can be valuable, fresh eyes as it were. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I found myself caught between them, unsure whose side I was supposed to be on, or if there were even sides to choose. Lucas has been very professional, I said diplomatically. We've established a good working relationship. I'm so glad to hear that. The last caregiver found him difficult to work with. What exactly happened with the last caregiver? I asked. Amelia and Lucas exchanged a look that I couldn't interpret. She felt that Lucas was becoming paranoid, Amelia said finally, making accusations about family members, claiming that people were trying to harm him. It became quite disturbing. I wasn't paranoid, Lucas said quietly. I was asking legitimate questions about my accident. Questions that the police had already answered. Questions that your doctors advised you to stop pursuing for the sake of your mental health. The police barely investigated, because there was nothing to investigate. For the first time since I'd met her, Amelia's composure cracked slightly. Lucas, you had a terrible accident. Your car malfunctioned, you lost control, and you were severely injured. That's tragic enough without inventing conspiracy theories. I'm not inventing anything. I have documentation. You have papers that you've been obsessing over for months, finding patterns that aren't there, because you can't accept that sometimes terrible things just happen. I watched this exchange with growing unease. Both of them seemed genuinely convinced they were right, but their versions of reality were completely incompatible. Maybe, I said carefully, it would help if we focused on the present rather than the past. Lucas is making excellent progress with his physical therapy, and that's what really matters right now. Both siblings turned to look at me, and I realized I'd just stepped into a minefield. You're absolutely right, Amelia said, her composure restored. The past is done. What matters is Lucas's future, and making sure he has the best possible care going forward. The past matters if someone tried to kill me, Lucas said flatly. No one tried to kill you. Amelia's voice rose again. You're my brother, Lucas. Do you really think I'd be here, caring for you day and night, if I thought someone in our family meant you harm? Half-brother, Lucas corrected, just as he had with me, and you weren't caring for me day and night before I became helpless. The words hung in the air like poison. Amelia's face went very pale, and for a moment I saw something flash in her eyes, hurt, anger, or maybe something else entirely. I think, she said, with forced calm, that you need to rest. These kinds of conversations aren't good for your blood pressure. My blood pressure is fine. Nevertheless, she turned to me. Thea, perhaps you could encourage Lucas to take a nap. I'll ask Mrs. Chen to prepare something light for lunch. After she left, closing the door with deliberate gentleness, Lucas and I sat in heavy silence. She's right about one thing, I said finally. These conversations are exhausting. Do you think I'm paranoid? I looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were clear and focused. His reasoning had been logical when he'd walked me through the business reports. He didn't seem like someone suffering from brain injury-induced delusions. I think, I said slowly, that someone who's been through what you've been through has every right to ask questions about what happened to them. But I also think that if someone really did try to hurt you, then talking about it openly in this house might not be the safest approach. Lucas leaned back in his wheelchair, studying me with renewed interest. Are you saying you believe me? I'm saying I'm not ready to dismiss your concerns, but I'm also not ready to take sides in whatever's going on between you and your sister. What would it take to convince you, I mean? I thought about that. Evidence, real evidence, not just inconsistencies in reports or suspicious timing. If someone tried to kill you, there would be traces, witnesses, motives, and if I could provide those things, then we'd need to figure out what to do about it. Very carefully. Lucas smiled for the first time since Amelia had entered the room. I knew you were different from the others. Different how? The others tried to manage me or fix me, or convince me to accept things I wasn't ready to accept. You're the first person who's been willing to actually listen. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. Maybe that's because I know what it's like to have people dismiss your instincts about your own life. Your fiancé, among other things. I spent months ignoring little signs that something was wrong because everyone around me kept saying how perfect we were together. I trusted other people's judgment over my own, and it almost destroyed me. Lucas nodded slowly. So you understand why I can't just accept Amelia's version of events, even if it would be easier. I understand. But Lucas, I met his eyes. If you're right about this, if someone really did try to hurt you, then you're not safe here, and neither am I. The weight of that realization settled between us like a third presence in the room. No, Lucas said quietly. We're probably not. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lucas's accusations about his accident kept replaying in my mind, along with Amelia's warnings about his paranoid thoughts. I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the conflicting stories. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and decided to make some tea. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way downstairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard voices coming from Amelia's study. I stopped, pressing myself against the wall. The study door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Amelia was inside, but she wasn't alone. "Told you this would be a problem," a man's voice was saying. "He's getting too close to the truth." "Lucas doesn't know anything concrete," Amelia replied, her voice tense. "He has suspicions, but no proof." "What about the caregiver? How much does she know?" My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. "Thea, nothing. She's exactly what we needed. Someone desperate enough to take the job without asking too many questions, but qualified enough to handle Lucas's medical needs." "Are you sure? She's been spending a lot of time with him. What if he's shared his theories with her? Then we'll deal with it the same way we dealt with the others." I pressed closer to the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. "This is getting out of hand, Amelia. Maybe we should just what? Kill him outright? That would raise far more questions than we need right now." The casual way she said it made my knees weak. I gripped the wall for support, trying to process what I was hearing. "The original plan was clean," the man continued. "One accident. Everything inherited through probate. No complications. Now we're managing a disabled person who's asking uncomfortable questions, and hiring caregivers who might figure things out." "The plan is still working," Amelia said firmly. "Lucas's cognitive issues make him an unreliable witness to anything. If he starts making serious accusations, we can have him declared mentally incompetent. I already have the documentation started. And the business." Ethan's getting impatient about the partnership transfer. Ethan, Lucas's business partner. I remembered him from the quarterly reports, the one Lucas had said was making reckless financial decisions. "Tell Ethan to be patient a little longer. Once Lucas is declared incompetent, I'll have full power of attorney. The business, the estate, everything will be under my control." "What about the caregiver situation? How many more are you going to go through before someone starts asking questions?" "Thea's different. She's isolated, running from her own problems. She has nowhere else to go, and no one who would believe her if she did raise concerns. She's perfect for our needs." The man chuckled, and the sound made my skin crawl. "You always were good at reading people, finding their weak spots. It's a useful skill. Thea's weakness is that she needs to be needed. She wants to save Lucas because she couldn't save her own relationship. As long as we make her feel like she's helping him, she'll stay right where we want her." I bit my lip to keep from gasping. They'd known about Tanner, about my broken engagement. This job hadn't been a fortunate coincidence. It had been a setup from the beginning. "What about her neighbor? The old woman who told her about the position, Dorothy Morrison. She has no idea she was being used. I simply made sure the classified ad appeared in the paper she reads, circled in a way that would catch her attention. When a lonely old woman finds something she thinks will help a struggling young person, she becomes very enthusiastic about playing matchmaker." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Dorothy hadn't accidentally found that job listing. Someone had manipulated her into finding it, knowing exactly how she would react. "You've thought of everything," the man said admiringly. "I've had months to plan this, ever since the brake line sabotage didn't finish the job properly." There it was, confirmation of what Lucas had suspected. Someone had tried to kill him, and when that failed, they'd moved to a longer-term strategy. "How much longer do you think we need to maintain this charade?" "Not much longer. Dr. Martinez has been very helpful in documenting Lucas's cognitive decline. A few more incidents of paranoid behavior, especially if witnessed by his caregiver, and we'll have everything we need for a competency hearing. And if Lucas becomes too much of a problem before then we'll arrange another accident, something that looks like a fall, or a reaction to his medications. Disabled people are fragile. These things happen." I'd heard enough, more than enough. I began backing away from the door as quietly as possible, desperate to get back to my room before they discovered me eavesdropping. But as I turned to leave, My foot caught the edge of an antique side table. A small crystal figure wobbled, and I lunged forward to catch it before it could fall and shatter on the marble floor. I caught it, but the movement sent my phone sliding out of my robe pocket. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. The voices in the study stopped abruptly. "What was that?" the man asked. I snatched up my phone and ran, abandoning any attempt at stealth. Behind me, I heard the study door open fully, footsteps in the hallway. "Hello?" Amelia called. "Is someone there?" I reached the staircase and took the steps 2 at a time, not caring how much noise I made. By the time I reached my room, my lungs were burning and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the door handle. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard. My phone was still clutched in my hand, and as I looked at it, an idea began to form. I opened the voice recording app and saw that it had been running. When I'd grabbed for the phone, I must have accidentally hit the record button. With trembling fingers, I played back the recording. The quality was muffled, but the voices were clear enough to understand. I had everything: their confession about the accident, their plans for Lucas, their manipulation of me and Dorothy. I had proof. But now I had to figure out what to do with it. Because if Amelia discovered that I knew the truth, I would probably be the next person to have an accident. I sat on my bed, staring at the phone, and realized that everything Lucas had told me was true. Someone had tried to kill him. They were still trying to kill him, and now I was trapped in the middle of their plan. The question was, could I find a way to save both of us before they realized what I knew? I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat in my bed with my laptop, transcribing every word I could make out from the recording. By dawn, I had a detailed account of Amelia's conversation, complete with timestamps and direct quotes. The hardest part was waiting until morning to act normal. I had to go through Lucas's routine as if nothing had changed, help him with his medications, assist with his physical therapy session with Dr. Martinez, all while knowing that the doctor was actively documenting supposed cognitive decline that would be used to have Lucas declared incompetent. When Dr. Martinez finally left, I locked Lucas's door and turned to face him. "We need to talk," I said quietly, "and you need to hear this." I played the recording on my phone, watching Lucas's face change as he listened to his half-sister casually discuss sabotaging his brakes and planning his mental incompetency declaration. By the time it finished, his knuckles were white where he gripped his wheelchair armrests. "She really tried to kill me," he said, his voice hollow. "Yes. And when that didn't work, she switched to a long-term plan to take control of your assets by having you declared mentally incompetent. Dr. Martinez is in on it. It sounds like it. He's been documenting cognitive issues that apparently don't exist." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, processing. "What about you? What did she say about you?" I hesitated, then told him everything about Dorothy being manipulated, about me being chosen because I was isolated and desperate, about how they planned to use my testimony about his paranoid behavior in the competency hearing. "Jesus," he whispered. "They've been playing both of us from the beginning. It looks that way. The question is, what do we do now?" Lucas looked at me with something that might have been hope. "You said we." "Of course I said we. They may have manipulated me into this situation, but now that I know the truth, I'm not just going to walk away and let them destroy you." "Why?" His question was genuine, curious. "You could leave right now, take that recording to the police, and wash your hands of all of this." I thought about that. A week ago I might have. But you were right when you said I need to be needed, not in the way Amelia meant it, as a weakness to exploit, but because I spent 2 years in a relationship where I was just decorative, pleasant but ultimately disposable. This is the first time in a long time that I feel like I'm actually making a difference in someone's life, even if it's dangerous, especially because it's dangerous. For the first time since Tanner left me, I feel like I'm fighting for something that matters. Lucas smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "So what's our plan?" "First, we need more evidence. This recording is good, but we need documentation of the financial fraud, proof of Dr. Martinez's involvement, something that shows the pattern of manipulation. I can help with the business side. Ethan's been pushing through transactions that I never approved. If I can access our company accounts, can you do that from here? I still have administrative access. Amelia doesn't know about my backup systems. Good. While you work on that, I'll try to gather more information about the other caregivers. What exactly happened to them? Are they willing to testify about what they witnessed? And then we take everything to the police and hope it's enough to protect us both. Lucas reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. Thea, thank you for believing me, for staying. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. We sat there for a moment, hands clasped, and I realized that somewhere in the middle of this nightmare, I'd found exactly what I'd been missing in my relationship with Tanner, a real partnership, built on honesty and mutual respect. Now we just had to survive long enough to see where it could lead. Our plans changed dramatically when Ethan arrived unannounced the next afternoon. I was helping Lucas with his physical therapy exercises when we heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, we watched a sleek black BMW pull up to the front entrance. The man who got out was tall, expensively dressed, and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. That's Ethan, Lucas said quietly, his face tense. He wasn't supposed to be here until next week. Could Amelia have called him? Maybe. Or maybe he's getting impatient about the business transfers. We heard voices downstairs, Amelia's welcoming tone and Ethan's deeper voice responding. I couldn't make out words, but there was an urgency to their conversation that made my stomach clench. Should I leave you alone with him? I asked. No, Lucas said quickly. Stay. If they're moving up their timeline, I want a witness to whatever he says. 20 minutes later, Amelia knocked on the door and entered with Ethan behind her. Up close, he was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room. Lucas, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. You look better than I expected. Hello, Ethan. This is my caregiver, Thea Hoffman. Ethan's gaze moved to me, and I felt like I was being evaluated for some purpose I didn't understand. Miss Hoffman, Amelia tells me you've been very helpful with Lucas's recovery. I try to be, I said carefully. Excellent. Lucas, I hope you don't mind me dropping by, but we have some urgent business matters to discuss. The Henderson Industries contract is moving faster than expected, and I need your signature on the partnership modifications we discussed. What modifications? Lucas asked. Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Amelia. The ones we outlined in my last email. Temporary restructuring to handle the increased workload while you're recovering. I never got that email. Really? That's strange. I sent it to your personal account last week. Ethan pulled out his phone. Let me forward it again. I watched this exchange with growing unease. The dynamic between the three of them felt carefully choreographed, like a play where everyone knew their lines except Lucas. Actually, Ethan continued, given the time-sensitive nature of this contract, maybe we should discuss the broader partnership structure. I know this isn't ideal timing, but the board is asking questions about leadership continuity. What kind of questions? Nothing personal, Lucas. Just practical concerns about decision-making capacity while you're dealing with your recovery. Some of the investors are nervous about having a partner who's not fully available. The words were carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear. They were questioning Lucas's mental fitness to run the company. I'm perfectly capable of making business decisions, Lucas said, his voice steady but tight. Of course you are, but perception matters in our industry. Maybe it would be better if I handled the day-to-day operations until you're completely back to your old self. How long are we talking about? Hard to say. Recovery from this type of injury can be unpredictable. Could be months, could be longer. I could see the trap closing around Lucas. If he agreed to step back temporarily, it would be used as evidence of his diminished capacity. If he refused, they'd claim he was being unreasonable and delusional about his abilities. I need time to think about this, Lucas said finally. Ethan's smile became strained. Unfortunately, time is something we don't have much of. The Henderson contract needs to be signed by Friday, or we lose the deal entirely. Then give me the documents to review. I don't have them with me. They're back at the office, being finalized by legal. Another lie, I realized. Ethan had come here specifically to pressure Lucas into signing away his authority, but he hadn't brought the actual contracts because he didn't want Lucas to read the fine print. I'll need to see them before I sign anything, Lucas said firmly. Of course, Amelia interjected smoothly. But Lucas, you know how overwhelming complex legal documents can be when you're dealing with cognitive fatigue. Maybe it would be easier if Ethan just handled this one transaction. My cognitive function is fine, is it? Ethan asked, his tone shifting to something almost patronizing. Because from what Amelia tells me, you've been having some episodes, paranoid thoughts about the accident, accusations against family members. That doesn't sound like the Lucas I used to know. The room went very quiet. Lucas's hands tightened on his wheelchair armrests, and I could see him struggling to control his temper. Those aren't episodes, he said carefully. Those are legitimate questions about inconsistencies in the accident investigation. See? Ethan looked at Amelia meaningfully. This is exactly what I'm talking about. After Ethan and Amelia left Lucas's room, we sat in heavy silence. The confrontation had revealed just how coordinated their efforts were, and how quickly they were moving to strip Lucas of his autonomy. It's all connected, I said suddenly, the pieces finally clicking together in my mind. What do you mean? My engagement party, the timing of everything. I stood up and began pacing, my thoughts racing. Think about it, Lucas. When exactly did Ethan start pushing for these business changes? About 3 weeks ago, right after I started asking questions about the accident investigation. And when did the classified ad appear in Dorothy's newspaper? Lucas's eyes widened as he understood. The same week, they needed to neutralize 2 threats at once. You were getting too close to the truth about your accident, and you were still mentally competent enough to block their takeover. So they arranged for me to be destroyed publicly and emotionally, then manipulated into this position where I'd be their unwitting accomplice. But why you specifically? Because of Tanner. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Tanner Ames. He's connected to this somehow. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Lucas, what's Ethan's full name? Ethan Clearwater. Why? My fingers flew across the screen, searching for connections between the names I knew. And there it was, buried in a Business Journal article from 6 months ago. Listen to this, I said, reading from my phone. Clearwater Capital Partners announced a strategic alliance with Ames Development Group, focusing on tech sector acquisitions in the Northeast Corridor. Ames Development Group, Lucas repeated slowly. Tanner's father's company. It gets worse. Look at this. I found another article. The partnership will be managed by Clarissa Ames, former international legal counsel for Clearwater Capital. Lucas's face went pale. Clarissa Ames, the cousin Tanner was having an affair with. She used to work for Ethan. She probably still does unofficially. I sat back down, my mind reeling. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer. They needed your business assets, but they also needed someone on the inside to document your supposed mental decline. Someone sympathetic, isolated, grateful for the opportunity. Someone like you. Exactly. But first they had to create that person. They had to destroy my life in exactly the right way, at exactly the right time. I thought about that night at the country club, how calculated everything had felt. The anonymous photos, the timing of the revelation at my engagement party, none of that was coincidence. You think they orchestrated your breakup? I think they orchestrated everything. Clarissa seduces Tanner, probably at Ethan's direction. They document the affair and wait for the perfect moment to destroy me publicly. Meanwhile, they plant the job listing where Dorothy will find it, knowing exactly how she'll react. Lucas shook his head in amazement. It's diabolical. It's thorough. They turned my greatest weakness, my need to be needed, into their greatest asset. I was supposed to be so grateful for this job, so desperate to prove myself, that I'd never question what I was really being asked to do. But you did question it. Only because you made me see things differently. If you'd been the helpless victim they wanted you to be, I might have gone along with their plan without ever realizing what I was doing. We looked at each other, and I could see the same realization dawning in his eyes that was forming in mine. They underestimated both of us, Lucas said. Yes. They thought trauma would make us weak and compliant. Instead, it made us see through their lies. So what do we do with that advantage? I smiled grimly. We use it to destroy them the same way they tried to destroy us. Systematically, completely, and with perfect timing. You have a plan. I'm starting to. But first we need to figure out exactly how deep this conspiracy goes, and how many other people they've hurt along the way. That night, Lucas and I worked until dawn, building our case with the methodical precision of prosecutors preparing for trial. We had transformed his room into a war room, with documents spread across every surface and multiple laptops running simultaneously. I found the smoking gun, Lucas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He turned his laptop screen toward me. Look at this series of transactions from 3 months before my accident. I leaned in to see bank records showing large transfers between various accounts. What am I looking at? Ethan moved $2.3 million from our operating account into a private investment fund. Look at the authorization signature. I squinted at the digital signature. It looked like Lucas's name, but something about it seemed off. Did you sign this? No, and look at the date. I was in Vermont that week, skiing, the same trip where I had my accident, so he was already stealing from the company while planning to kill you. It gets worse. Lucas pulled up another screen. That investment fund? It's managed by Clearwater Capital Partners. Ethan was essentially moving our money into his own pocket. I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. How much did he take total? So far, nearly $8 million, all transferred in small amounts over 6 months, each transaction forged with my digital signature. Can you prove the signatures are fake? I can prove I wasn't physically present to sign them. But more importantly, I have security footage from our office building showing Ethan accessing my computer after hours. Lucas switched to another file. Our IT department archives everything. I downloaded 6 months of security logs before Amelia could think to restrict my access. I studied the timestamps. He was there almost every night, sometimes for hours, transferring money, forging documents, probably coordinating with his partners. Lucas pulled up an email archive. And look at this correspondence with Clarissa Ames, dating back 8 months. The emails were carefully coded, but the pattern was clear. Clarissa had been feeding Ethan information about potential opportunities while gradually getting closer to Tanner. The seduction hadn't been spontaneous, it had been a calculated business strategy. They needed Tanner to break up with you at exactly the right moment. Lucas said, too early, and you might have found another job before they were ready. Too late, and I might have recovered enough to defend myself. So they used Clarissa to control the timing of my destruction, while Ethan positioned himself to take over your company. I shook my head in amazement. These people don't just ruin lives, they schedule it. We need to be just as methodical in our response, Lucas said. One mistake and they'll accelerate their timeline. Ethan's already pushing for immediate signature authority, and Amelia's been talking to Dr. Martinez about scheduling a cognitive evaluation. How long do we have? Maybe a week before they force the competency issue, which means we need to move first. I looked at the evidence we'd gathered: financial records, security footage, recorded conversations, forged documents. What's our play? We give them what they want, Lucas said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We set up a meeting where Ethan thinks he's finally getting those signatures, but instead of signing away my rights, I'm going to hand over evidence of his embezzlement to the FBI. The FBI? Bank fraud across state lines, conspiracy, attempted murder. This is federal territory now. Local police might be influenced by family connections, but the FBI answers to different authorities. What about Amelia? She's going down with him. Accessory to attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse. She won't see the outside of a prison cell for 20 years. I felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. And Clarissa, wire fraud, conspiracy, probably a dozen other charges once they start digging into her involvement with Clearwater Capital. Lucas closed the laptop. But first, we need to make sure we survive long enough to see justice done. You think they'll try to hurt us before the meeting? I think they're getting desperate. and desperate people do desperate things. The meeting was set for Friday morning in the estate study. Ethan arrived precisely at 10 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase that presumably contained the documents he wanted Lucas to sign. Amelia was already waiting, positioned behind the massive mahogany desk like a judge preparing to pass sentence. I stood in the corner, playing my role as the concerned my phone discreetly recording everything. "Lucas," Ethan said, his smile radiating false warmth, "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable about this." "Oh, I'm being very reasonable," Lucas replied from his wheelchair. "I've been reviewing some documents of my own." He gestured to me, and I placed a thick folder on the desk between them. Ethan's confident expression faltered slightly as he saw the bank records and security footage printouts. "What's this?" Amelia asked, reaching for the folder. "Evidence," Lucas said simply, "of embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." The color drained from Ethan's face. "Lucas, I think your injury has affected your judgment more than we realized." "My judgment is fine," Lucas interrupted. "In fact, it's never been clearer. I know about the forged signatures, Ethan. I know about the $8 million you've stolen from our company. I know about your partnership with the Ames family, and I know about Clarissa's role in destroying Thea's engagement." Amelia's composure cracked completely. "You're being paranoid again, Lucas. These conspiracy theories aren't theories," I said, stepping forward. "They're facts, and I have the recordings to prove it." I played the audio from that night in the hallway, watching their faces as their own voices filled the room, casually discussing brake line sabotage and mental incompetency declarations. "That's enough," Ethan said, standing abruptly. "This conversation is over." "Actually," Lucas said with satisfaction, "it's just beginning, because in about 30 seconds the FBI is going to walk through that door." As if on cue, we heard cars in the driveway. Through the window, I could see black SUVs surrounding the estate. "You called the FBI?" Amelia whispered. "Yesterday, along with the state attorney general's office and the insurance fraud division." Lucas smiled. "Did you really think I'd face you without backup?" The study door opened, and Agent Sarah Chen entered with 3 other federal agents. "Ethan Clearwater, Amelia Reynolds, you're under arrest." I watched through the study window as Ethan and Amelia were led away in handcuffs, their carefully constructed facades finally crumbling. Ethan kept protesting his innocence, while Amelia maintained her cold composure even as Agent Chen read her rights. "It's over," Lucas said quietly from behind me. I turned to find him looking drained but relieved, the tension that had defined him for months finally beginning to ease. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Surreal. For so long I thought I was losing my mind, having people constantly tell you that your instincts are wrong, that your memories can't be trusted." He shook his head. I started doubting myself. "But you didn't give up." "I couldn't. And having you believe me, having someone finally listen," his voice caught slightly, "that made all the difference." Agent Chen approached us, closing her notepad. "We'll need formal statements from both of you, but what you've provided gives us enough to move forward. The financial crimes alone will put Clearwater away for decades." "What about Dr. Martinez?" I asked. "Already in custody. Turns out he's been falsifying cognitive assessments for other wealthy patients as well. This is bigger than just your case." After the agents left, Lucas and I sat in his room, surrounded by the evidence that had brought down their conspiracy. The house felt different now, no longer a prison, but simply a home, where terrible things had happened. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I rebuild," Lucas said. "My company, my life, my ability to trust people." He looked at me meaningfully. "What about you? You're free to go anywhere, do anything." I thought about that. A week ago I would have run back to my old life, tried to piece together what remained of my former plans. But sitting here with Lucas, I realized I didn't want my old life back. "I like it here," I said simply. "If you'll have me, not as your caregiver, but as my partner," he finished, reaching for my hand. "In every sense of the word, even though we're both still healing, especially because of that. We understand each other's scars." For the first time in months, I felt completely safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. We'd been through the worst together, and emerged stronger. "Lucas." "Yeah?" Thank you for teaching me to trust my instincts again. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for proving they were worth trusting. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace where this nightmare had begun, watching Lucas walk across the garden without assistance. His recovery had been remarkable once the stress of the conspiracy was lifted, both physical and emotional healing accelerating beyond what any doctor had predicted. The estate looked different now too. We'd opened the curtains, removed the security cameras, filled the house with friends and laughter. Lucas had hired back the original staff who'd been dismissed when Amelia moved in, and they'd welcomed me not as temporary help, but as family. The prosecution called, Lucas said, joining me on the terrace. Ethan pled guilty to all charges, 25 years, no possibility of parole, and Amelia, 15 years. She tried to claim she was manipulated by Ethan, but the jury didn't buy it. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. It's really over, Thea. I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I got a text from Jennifer today. She and Tanner broke up. How do you feel about that? Nothing, I said honestly. It's like hearing about strangers. That whole life feels like it belonged to someone else. In a way it did. You're not the same person who walked out of that engagement party. He was right. The woman who'd been so desperate for approval, so willing to ignore her instincts to maintain the illusion of perfection, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more authentic, someone who trusted herself above all others. Lucas, thank you. For what? For showing me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing. For proving that real love isn't about fixing each other, it's about growing together. He turned me in his arms, his smile soft and genuine. Speaking of growing together, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know we've both been through the engagement thing before, and it didn't end well for either of us. But this time feels different. Different how? This time I know exactly who I'm asking to marry me. Not an illusion, not a convenience, but the real you. The woman who saved my life by trusting her instincts and refusing to let them break either of us. Looked at the ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Tanner had given me. This one was chosen for me, not for show. Yes, I whispered. Yes, absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized this was what happiness actually felt like, not the desperate grasping after perfection I'd mistaken for love before, but the quiet confidence that comes from being truly known and choosing each other anyway. We'd both learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were actually looking for, and what we'd found was worth every moment of the journey.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.